Hey everybody, Caleb here, and let's talk about intonation. So initially I was going to start work on how to make a cheap guitar play better too, but I got talking about intonation and I was thinking about it quite a bit. And you know, when I say how to make a cheap guitar play better, I don't think that always means how to make a cheap guitar sound better. I think sound better is really subjective. From person to person, it's very, individual on what sounds better. I think when you say play better, typically you mean a measurable number. How to make a guitar play better, a string height of 90 thousandths plays better than a string height of 100 thousandths. It's a little more measurable. I think the only exception to this rule that I can think of off the top of my head is intonation. Intonation to me makes a guitar sound better, and it is measurable. It's pretty black and white on whether it's intonated well or intonated poorly. So I got out this guitar today. We're going to talk about this one a little bit. I'll get some acoustics out. We'll talk about that too. But I know that my telly is a little off, and it's going to be because of the way it's built. So I'm going to set it down, I'm going to point the camera at it, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. So when we start talking about intonation, I guess the most important thing is to what are we really talking about? And it's making sure that notes are in tune as you move up the fretboard. Or moreover, making sure notes are as in tune as they can be as you move up the fretboard. Now, a lot of intonation is done, and when I say a lot, I mean most of it's done at the saddle. So if you buy a pre-slotted fretboard, they have already decided what the scale length is, and the scale length is the distance from the nut to the saddle. So all the slots for the frets have already been decided. That's where they should be mathematically for this scale length to be intonated properly. Now, where typically you run into problems is where the saddle is located. Most of the time, fret locations are good, the nut is right. You run into a problem when you hit the saddle. So once we get started looking at this bridge here, you'll notice this saddle is not straight because these strings don't intonate properly at the same length. So it has this angle to it. You'll notice that angle on acoustic guitars. On most guitars, this one sits like an acoustic guitar, and most of them do, where the treble string is furthest forward, the bass string is furthest back. And, we'll start talking about saddles here, and this has 3 saddles. There are pretty much 3 types of saddles you'll see. There are 2 other really common ones. We talk acoustic guitars is probably very common, and then the other one would be individual saddles, one for each string. So on this guitar, you have quite a bit of adjustment for your saddle, but because there's only 3, you kind of have to break the difference, meet in the middle on the 2 strings that you're working on. You're adjusting 2 of them at the same time, so they have to get as close as you can get them, and basically you're splitting the middle on what would be perfect for those 2 strings. Now, if we talk about acoustic saddles, that's been placed. Once that's placed, you can't do much, but you might be able to see, compensate the saddle. The B string here has been filed back so that the point in which the string leaves is further in than most of the others. That's to help compensate that so it intonates properly. The other type of saddle you'll see very often is 6 individual saddles. This is the easiest to intonate. Because you have 6 individual saddles, you can take each string one by one and get it the perfect distance it needs to be. Most electric guitars have individual saddles for each string at this point. Not all of them do, but most modern guitars have the individual saddles. That helps get intonation spot on. There's a lot more play in this than like an acoustic bridge. Once you've cut your saddle slot, you're kind of stuck with it. This one, you can move it back and forth. You've got this much room for adjustment. They may not always take this shape in this 2-piece tailpiece here, where I have bridge and tailpiece, Sometimes you may see it as one piece, like on Strats or things of that nature. Like here you can see I have the tremolo, but I still have 6 individual saddles. So they have plenty of adjustment to get them perfectly intonated. Electric guitars are the easiest ones to do because they're built, the bridges are built in a way that they can be adjustable to get them perfectly intonated. If you're building an acoustic guitar, it's not super hard to get the intonation right if you know what you're doing. If you've seen me do it before, you can set up a temporary tailpiece and the 2 outside strings, then float a saddle on your bridge and get it perfectly intonated. Then you'll know where your outside marks are, and everything else will intonate well enough in between. That works really well for acoustic guitars and gets them intonated very well. But these are probably the hardest to adjust if you get it wrong. If you're off by too much, your saddle may not go to where it's intonated properly. You tend to run into this problem on cheaper guitars where they just measure and place. They don't always check the intonation for that sort of thing. There is more than one way to intonate a saddle properly before you put strings down. I would recommend, if you're looking to do this, look up some videos on how to intonate a saddle properly the first time, because once you get it right, you'll be much happier than if you're trying to fix it down the line. Get it right the first time and you'll be set forever. But for today, I want to work on my telly, as I'm pretty sure I have some intonation issues I can work out. I don't think it's going to be that difficult to, check it. I'll get a tuner up and I'll show you how we can check to see where we're at and which directions we need to move. We'll do that on here today. And this thing should be playing better than it's ever played if we get it right. So first and foremost, we need to check the intonation. And to do that, we need to make sure we're totally in tune. So make sure each string is in tune open. So once you're sure every string is in tune open, you'll start checking at the 12th fret. And you'll see here that my low E string is sharp. What this means is that the saddle is too far forward. The saddle needs to move back. An easy way to remember this is if it's sharp, the string is too short, so the saddle needs to go back. If it's flat, the saddle is too far from the nut, so it needs to come back in towards the nut. I'm going to go ahead and write down what's what. So the low E is sharp. It will help me remember as I go through. Then we'll move to the A string. Make sure it's in tune. Hit it at the 12. It's mostly sitting right on, but it's going just a little bit sharp. So I'm going to say that it's also just a little sharp. We'll go to the D string. And it's just barely sharp as well. The G string. The G string is maybe a hair sharper than the D string. That B string is a little out of tune. Spot on. I think that B string is just barely floating sharp as well. I'd say that E is pretty close. Something that can help, just a little tip while you're doing something like this, is to mute the other strings so you don't get any sympathetic notes ringing out. You can see I've got my hand set, my thumb is set over the strings I'm not trying to tune. That's actually set pretty well. The E might just be a hair on the sharp side, but it's really close to being right on. So, now for this guitar, adjustment is really easy. I do have to kind of decide what's right in the middle, but to adjust these saddles forward and back, there is screws in the back. I may put a piece of tape down to protect the finish while I'm sticking a screwdriver back here. that's another good tip. But adjustment is really easy. And you want to go with small adjustments on this sort of thing. You don't want to go too far. It probably won't hurt you too much, but small adjustments tend to work better. As these strings are stretched and pulled, they may start going out of tune a little bit more, holding tune in odd spots, getting stuck on certain places. So small adjustments is best for this sort of thing. So for the most part, they were all pretty sharp, which means the string is too short. The saddle needs to come in. So I'll go give them all about a quarter turn, except for that high one. That high one was just barely off. So I just gave it about probably less than an eighth of a turn. And then we'll go through and we'll check it all again. This is a really back and forth process. And you have to retune after every adjustment you make. So I think I'm going to work on just these bass two for a second here. You can see the A is still running a little sharp and the E is really running sharp. So I'm going to go ahead and back that out a little bit more. So the A is now sitting right on. And the E is much closer. I think that's the decision I'm going to make for that one. Because they move together, they have to be close enough for this sort of bridge. So that's the choice I'm going to make. That's going to be close enough for that saddle. We'll move on to the middle saddle now. Both the D and the E string are still just a little bit sharp, so I'll move them back a little bit more. They're still floating a hair. See, I'm doing really small adjustments here. I don't really want to overshoot this. I'd like to get it right on. Now those D and G, that G is sitting perfectly on and the D just barely floats off. So I think that's what I'm going to call good enough. Both the E and the B are still just a hair sharp, so I'll move them back now. Another tip, I try to keep tuning up. So as I pull these strings a little tight, I'll try to loosen past the note and then come back up to it. It helps the strings stay on the pitch I want them on. Be still a little sharp. That E's almost spot on. I think I'm going to go still just a touch more to get that B a little bit closer. There, so that B just barely floats off, and that E's spot on. So that's looking really good. That's pretty much it for adjusting these kinds of guitars. And a lot of the physical parts of this carry over to any guitar. If it's sharp, you have to move that saddle backwards. That's how you get them to intonate better. So if you're doing an acoustic guitar that's coming up sharp, you should file a little bit off the front of that saddle to move the point in which the string leaves the saddle backwards. So I hope this video has helped you out. I think I've explained it in a way that most people can understand. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a lot of checking the tuning and making sure everything's right where you want it to be. And, this is no thing that you should rush. If you go slow, you can get it really good, really easy. It's not all that difficult. So I hope you enjoyed watching me intonate this up. Hopefully the next video should be how to make a cheap guitar play better part 2. Thanks for watching, and I will see you later.